Hi everyone, I'm Rob. I'm one of the foraging instructors for Wild Food UK, and I've been based near Bristol until recently, and I relocated with my family to Wales some months ago, and life's been pretty busy. This video has been a little while in the making, so you might see in one of the later videos as part of this video the season is slightly different, so that's testament to us wanting to get this video right for you. So thankfully I had a little bit of time away from work and the kids today to do this video for you. For the first time I'm at the Glenere estate, which is a beautiful estate where we run foraging courses over sort of just north of Swansea, and yeah, my first time running it today, so I came super early and I had a little bit of time and I thought, okay, let's get this video done. And what are we talking about? So I really wanted to talk to you about why I think foraging is really good for both your physical health and your mental health. And we're just going to kind of go through some of that and unpack that a little bit. And I guess really from the perspective, a medical perspective. So I'm a GP is sort of my day job, and then I run foraging courses for Wild Food UK at the weekends, which I absolutely love, and it's kind of like medicine for me, basically. I feel, yeah, it's really nourishing, de-stressing. I love just getting outside and doing some foraging and telling people about it, because it's a great thing to be doing. How did I get into it? Because it's not your average sort of side gig for a GP, I guess. But yeah, some years ago, my wife and I, she's also a doctor, and we were doing a kind of wilderness expedition medicine course, so learning about sort of medicine on expeditions and in different hostile environments and stuff. And literally as a kind of time filler, these guys threw in a foraging walk, and I was just absolutely hooked from the moment I put some wood sorrel in my mouth, and yeah, just loved it. And I think probably a big part of that for me was actually that all these plants and mushrooms that I would sort of walk past and that I didn't know the names of, I had no real connection to, actually they took on real significance and meaning and purpose for me when I knew their names and could kind of identify them and connect with them and realize that some of them were delicious and some of them were poisonous, but actually it's that connection and meaning I think is what I find most exciting about that. So yeah, it's gone on from there really, and I guess it's deepened my love of nature in general and my desire to sort of protect nature, and I think it's impossible to think about physical and mental health in isolation from planetary health. Actually, we have to care for this planet in order to sustain our own physical and mental health. So we're going to just focus on the physical health in this first part of the video and go on to the kind of mental health stuff in a bit. So physical health, so about 90% of what comes to see a GP and a GP surgery is actually hugely influenced or caused by lifestyle factors. So what sort of stuff am I talking about? I guess I'm talking about your diet, whether you exercise or not, chronic stress, sleep, and sleep deprivation kind of raises cortisol hormones, stress hormones, so leads to sort of that sort of stress, chronic stress response. And also things like your circadian rhythm, whether your day-night cycle is kind of well established, because that is really helped by being out in daylight and getting light into your eyes. So these sorts of things massively influence all sorts of things that walk through a door of a GP surgery. So obvious examples would be people come with high cholesterol, high blood pressure, high blood sugar when we sort of do tests and things. Obviously, some people come with overweight or obesity, and they're kind of concerned about that. And all those things that I've just mentioned are all really interconnected as part of your overall sort of metabolism and metabolic health. And the problem is they also lead to downstream diseases. So they increase your risk of having things like heart attacks and strokes, and also dementia and kidney disease and peripheral vascular disease, where you've got insufficient blood supply to your legs. So there are these downstream things from these original sort of diseases or risk factors. So I think a big one to start on is diet. So we know that in the Western diet we have sort of particularly when we buy ultra processed foods. So when you look at the packaging and you don't recognize some of the ingredients as being things you could dig out of your cupboard or your fridge. And there's just a whole string of these ingredients, even for things like cereals and bread. You know, if you look at it, if you don't know what some of the ingredients are on that packaging, if it's out of a chemistry laboratory rather than your cupboard, it's an ultra processed food. We know that in these sorts of foods as well, there's added fat, there's added sugar, and too much added salt, as well as the fact that there's all these extra chemicals, which we're still learning actually what are the downstream consequences for some of these chemicals. The other sort of side of it is when you take a plant or a sort of whole food, so for example a carrot or whatever, you know, that carrot is more than the sum of its parts. It's more than just the sum of the carbohydrate, the fiber, whatever is in that sort of carrot, because actually it's this complex matrix structure of all these cells stuck together that makes that carrot something that's not just carbohydrate and fiber and stuff, but actually a food that is your body recognizes as something that's really nourishing for you, and your body knows how to digest it. Whereas ultra processed foods, what they've done is they've taken something like, for example, maize, stripped it down to sort of produce these particular compounds that they then add into this sort of food like substance and reconstitute it into something that is edible and very delicious, to the point of potentially being addictive, but it's just not doing the same thing as those original whole food ingredients would. A part of that as well is the loss of the fiber, because actually in plants and mushrooms, quite a big ingredient in all of them really is fiber, and we're learning more and more about what fiber is and how important it is. I'll come on to that in a sec, but I just want to demonstrate that they did this study where they had two food groups, so an ultra processed food and a whole food group. They separated people into these two wings, and they said you can eat whatever you like, and they produced a lasagna and a lasagna, but one of them was like an ultra processed one and one was made with whole food ingredients. Now interestingly, these people could eat whatever they liked, but they, in the ultra processed food group, they ended up eating 500 calories a day more than the people in the whole food group. And there are multiple reasons for that. So one is you can just eat this food quicker. You can get it down you quicker because it's not this complex structure with lots of fiber in it that requires more chewing. Food goes down quicker, you can chew it quicker, it falls apart easier. You're also less satisfied by it, so you want to go back for more. And some of that is due to perhaps peaks and troughs in your blood sugar levels because of the added sugar and refined carbohydrates in ultra-processed foods. Also the lack of fiber, and fiber is filling. It's one of those things that is satisfying and leaves you feeling full. So these different reasons why you end up just eating more. And I guess that addictive thing again. So, you know, these things have been made by food manufacturers to sell, not because they care lots about your health, but because they want you to buy their product. And so, you know, they're made to be utterly delicious to the point of actually being quite addictive, I think. So, yeah, that's sort of something about ultra processed foods. I'm falling over. Yeah, as opposed to eating food that is nourishing for your body, that the human body has kind of learned over thousands and thousands of years that this is what food is, and you know, this is what's actually going to be really nourishing. So I guess that's a kind of bit of an explanation about what is ultra processed food. For the forager, I guess, you know, the exciting thing is there is a load of free, you know, locally grown, no plastic waste, no food miles, just thinking about that planetary health side of things again, food that is available to everyone who knows about it, basically. Yeah, I think that's absolutely awesome. There's a sort of treasure trove of whole foods that you can get access to that you just couldn't in your supermarket, sort of thing. And certainly from the Zoe studies that I mentioned, Zoe earlier, they've basically looked at actually how many plants should we be eating in a week, how many is kind of going to be beneficial for us, and 30 is the answer. So if you could be eating 30 different kinds of plants a week, and that's everything from fruit and veg, nuts and seeds, whole grains, legumes, even herbs and spices, actually that's going to be really beneficial for your overall health. The forage has got a distinct advantage in that. I think sort of one thing that I would love to expand on briefly is the gut microbiome. So I mentioned fiber earlier, and fiber, I was taught in med school, fiber is just something that your body can't use for food, so it just helps transit through the gut and comes out the other end, sort of thing. But we've now learned loads about that. There are all these different kinds of fiber, and they actually act as food for your gut microbes. So the good bugs that live in your gut and actually help to ferment those foods. And fiber is found in basically all plants and also mushrooms, not in animal products. So these good gut microbes, they ferment this, and in doing so they produce all sorts of clever chemicals like short chain fatty acids, which sort of reduce inflammation and send all sorts of signals around your body. So food sends messages sort of to your body. It's not just energy that we consume, and it doesn't matter what it comes from. 300 calories of carrots versus 300 calories of Mars bar does very different things to your body hormonally. So the other sort of thing that is food for these gut microbes are chemicals called polyphenols, which are lots of different chemicals, which are sort of like defense chemicals for plants. And they're also interestingly often colorful. So anthocyanins found in blueberries, for example, or carotenoids found in sort of yellowy orange fruits and stuff. Or lycopene is the red in tomatoes, for example. They add bright colors. So finding a big diversity of sort of coloured foods is a really helpful thing for getting a big range of polyphenols. And the bigger range of polyphenols and fibres that you eat, so the bigger range of plants and mushrooms you eat, actually that nourishes a bigger diversity of gut microbes, and that is really key for sort of producing health, both in terms of metabolic health, but also we're learning more. There's sort of increasing evidence, sort of immune health, so reduced risk of autoimmune diseases, allergic diseases, and also sort of inflammation, and therefore things like cancer. So it's interesting. We know that obesity, for example, is linked to 13 different kinds of cancer and is actually the cause for 1 in 20 kinds of cancer. So some of that is going to be due to chronic inflammation, and possibly a significant bit of that is going to be due to also all these chemicals that people are missing out on if they're not eating a big range of whole plant foods and nourishing a healthy gut microbiome. So it's something that you can really think about in terms of your food as a really positive way of framing food, rather than, I shouldn't eat this, I shouldn't eat that. Actually, I really want to eat as big a range of plants and mushrooms as I can. So I find that quite helpful. So we've talked about metabolic diseases, cancer, autoimmune diseases and allergies and all that sort of stuff. So a whole range of different ways that diet influences your health. And the forager, there's tons of stuff you can go and forage that you can't get in the shop. So I think that's awesome and incentive enough. But there's other things, I guess. You're also exercising, you're walking around when you're foraging, which is also really good for your health, building your muscle strength. And muscle's the biggest sort of store we have in our bodies for sort of blood sugar. And so if we expand our muscles, we're better able to control our blood sugar levels, reducing our risk of diabetes and stuff. It's also, I don't know about you, but when I'm foraging, I'm just so present in that moment. I'm just loving what I'm doing. I'm so sort of fixed in it. I'm not worried about the past. I'm not worried about the future. I'm just in the now. And that is, you could call that mindfulness. And that's been shown to be a hugely helpful thing for our mental health. And it's really de-stressing, I guess, when you're kind of going out foraging. You're just getting rid of some of that stressful stuff. And I think also, I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, I think, or early on, light. Like, we spend too much time indoors, and actually when we get outside and we get that natural light going into our eyes, there's expanding science now that shows that goes directly from our eyes, that sort of signal, into a special bit of our brain, which sets our biological clock within every cell of our body. And that can help us to sort of sleep better, to regulate better, and again, reducing sort of stress hormone levels like cortisol and things like that. So there are a ton of different ways that foraging is really good for your physical health. We'll go on to chat a bit more about your mental health in a minute. Right. So how does foraging help your mental health? So that's the thing I'm going to kind of concentrate on for the next few minutes. And I think probably one of the most helpful areas of research actually is something called the 5 Ways to Well-being, which you may or may not have heard of. And it was some research done by the New Economics Foundation, who are a charity whose goal really is kind of lobbying the government in thinking that our economy and our sort of country's goals should not be solely based on ever-increasing economic growth, but also consider other factors like the environment and caring for that, and also people's well-being. And they did a load of research looking at a whole load of sort of qualitative studies into people's mental health and well-being. And from that kind of derived these 5 ways to well-being of things that they drew out that can really help people's well-being. And I think the cool thing about foraging is you hit all 5 of them. So let's just kind of look into that a little bit. So one of them is connecting. So connecting with other people. I think also connecting with this beautiful planet that we get to call home. So we'll come back to that. Another one is being active. As you can tell, I'm slightly breathless carrying this little rascal along. One of 2, they keep me busy. And well, she's 2 of 2 actually. So being active is really good for our mental well-being. We'll kind of go more into that in a sec. Then there's learning. So any of you who've listened to Marlowe for any length of time will say, we're not mycologists, we're foragers. So, but we've got the whole realm of mycology to learn about. We're not botanists. So we don't need to know things as intricately as the botanists, although we've got the whole realm of botany to kind of enjoy and learn about. And then there's things like folklore, there's all the sort of cooking and cuisine side of things. There's so much magic and mystery really to learn about. Any number of rabbit holes you could spend a lifetime learning about, which is super fun. So that's 3. And then what are the other 2? So then there's giving. So it may interest you to know that actually giving is something that's really good for our well-being. And obviously going out on a forage, not only can you share knowledge with people, which I think is a incredible gift in itself, but you can also hopefully take home a load of tasty plants and mushrooms and stuff and cook people a delicious meal. So that's your giving. And then the last one is paying attention. So it's really just about that kind of mindful thing of noticing things, noticing things around you. I guess just not being present, I think, is the key. So not worrying about the future and all the stuff you've got to do in the coming days or weeks or months. Not worrying about the past or the things that have bothered you, but actually stopping for a sec and just looking and enjoying the autumn leaves, enjoying the songs of the birds. And for us as foragers, you are just tuned in. It's more like a treasure hunt. You're kind of looking for what's there on the day, and that's a really exciting kind of mindful, being present thing. So those are the 5. So connecting, being active, learning, giving, and paying attention. So if we just look slightly more at those, so I think the connecting and the being active one is particularly interesting in how they are connected. So there's research going on. Most people have heard of endorphins as chemicals that are released when we exercise and they make us happier. But there have been newer molecules discovered recently, which scientists initially called hope molecules, and they're now calling them myokines, because they're sort of chemical signals released by our muscles when we move our muscles, when we move our body. And they're kind of breaking them down to work out in more detail what they are. Some of them are called endocannabinoids, and they interestingly help form social connection. So there's kind of thoughts that actually if you do a shared physical activity, that builds greater social connection than if you were just static, if you weren't doing anything, if you were sat opposite someone. So I think that's quite an exciting thing to think about. It certainly makes a lot of sense in terms of thinking about humans and our sort of prehistoric past, in terms of tribes and needing to move in groups and gather together and hunt together and all that sort of stuff. So if you can get outside, move your body, looking for mushrooms and plants, that helps build greater social connection. I think this thing about mindfulness, being connected or sort of paying attention, I think is also particularly interesting. They found that they've actually done studies looking at people's kind of empathy as well. So for example, they took a group of, I think it was Harvard students, and they got some of them just to sort of study a tree, just look at it for a little while. And some of them, they got to study the buildings. They were just examining and looking at the buildings. And then they got someone to walk past and drop some pens. They actually found the ones that were sort of looking at the nature, the trees, actually had greater empathy and were more likely to help the person and pick up the pens. So I think there is something about nature connection and that kind of mindfulness, being present when you are in nature, that's particularly good for our health. There's other studies, I think, going back to the active thing, that even a 10-minute walk in nature can help reduce anxiety levels. So I think bundle all that together, you hit all 5 ways to well-being when you go out on a good forage. So why wouldn't you, I say? You want to say bye? She's loving it. So yeah, that's kind of hopefully shown a little way in which foraging is really good for your mental health as well. But one area I just wanted to come back to is diet and mental health. So there was this randomized controlled trial performed called the SMILES trial, which basically showed that people with moderate to severe depression, this was performed in Australia, were helped by going on the Mediterranean diet. So one group were put on the Mediterranean diet with sort of dietitian support, and the other group were given kind of fairly sort of decent social support as a kind of control group. And there was this big effect in showing that the people in the dietary group actually had a really good treatment effect in reducing their symptoms of depression. And it's kind of being worked out exactly how that works, but most people would think it's an effect of kind of the chemicals released by our bodies when we break down those plants, and by the gut microbiome sort of breaking down those plants and releasing serotonin and things like this via the gut-brain axis, essentially those chemicals going from the gut to the brain and being necessary to have a good mood. I suppose that's kind of perhaps a reframing of it. It's not so much that this is a treatment for depression, but more perhaps there's a fundamental need. Unsurprisingly, if you think about our kind of evolutionary history as creatures on this planet, like what are the inputs that the human body needs to thrive? One of those is to eat a whole range of different whole plant foods and maybe mushrooms. Another is to move our bodies. Another is to not live in kind of chronic stress all day, every day, sleep deprivation. and to live in community with one another. So I think all these things are the necessary inputs we need to have for healthy bodies and minds. I guess the other side of it, which I think is really worth talking about, is just actually when we pick plants that are, and mushrooms that are growing locally, you know, in places of local abundance, there's no plastic pollution with that, there's no carbon footprint to that, and actually we're caring for the planet a little bit more. I think it's always important to be mindful of the effect that our food has on the planet as well. We have to be mindful as foragers that we don't overpick. I think that's a really important point. But thinking about the effect that our food has on the planet is important too. So I hope that as you've sort of been through this little video, you're as convinced as I am that actually foraging is really good for your physical and your mental health, and you'll be encouraged to go out and do it more. All right, thank you.